Good evening, everyone. Very happy to welcome you back to Wise Views interactive webinar series this Friday. We have a very distinguished guest with us today, Professor Janat Shah. I am quite excited and I take immense pride in introducing Professor Janat Shah. The fact that I was a student at IIM Bangalore gives that excitement to start with. And there are many more things as I'm going to introduce him right now. The topic is role of digital in reimagining operations and supply chain. The first 30 minutes, we will listen to Professor Janat Shah. He will deliver a talk and followed by questions and answers, which will be moderated by my colleague, Professor R. Prasad and I. And that will be for another 30 minutes. These questions were collected at the time of registration for the webinar. And also some of the questions will be picked up when the session is in progress. So, as I said, Professor Janat Shah was an alumnus of IIT Mumbai, and he obtained his PhD from IIM Ahmedabad. He held various positions at IIM Bangalore. He was the chairperson of postgraduate program. He was also the coordinator of management program for technologies and chairperson supply chain management center at IIM Bangalore. A visiting scholar at the Sloan School of Management, MIT. He currently holds the position of special professor at Nottingham University. He worked as a consultant with and had been responsible for many management education programs for executives in a number of companies, including Aditya Birla Group, Bharti Airtel, IBM, Infosys, Ingersoll Rand, Mahindra & Mahindra, Marico Industries, Tata Chemicals, Tata Motors, Tata Teleservices, Yokogawa, and Blue Star. Professor Janat Shah helped companies design and develop decision support systems for supply chain management. He received several awards. He was also voted as the best teacher by MBA class of 1999. He was the principal researcher of the team, which has won IBM Faculty Awards 3 times in 2005, 2006, and 2008 for their work on human resource supply chain management. Professor Janat Shah is the founding director and professor of operations management at IIM Udaipur. His book on supply chain management, text and cases has been used in MBA and executive MBA courses at IIM Bangalore, as well as various other B schools throughout India. He has also published extensively in national and international journals. I must also mention here that ever since Professor Janat Shah had taken over the reins of IIM Udaipur, IIM Udaipur has been growing in leaps and bounds with various international accreditations, one of them being the AACSB accreditation that makes IIM Udaipur the youngest B school to be accredited in India. With these few words, I now welcome Professor Janat Shah to deliver his talk. Thank you very much, sir, for agreeing to speak in our webinar. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhakar, for those kind words and inviting me to talk on a subject which, something which it's something which we're still working on. So this is a, area where I and a colleague of mine, Professor Sai Prakash, who's an adjunct faculty at IIM Udaipur, both of us have been working together on this. So what I'm talking about is a sort of conversations which we have done in this area. He's a professor of strategy, while I come from operations and supply chain. So essentially, I want to talk about this whole, the way, if I'm a, senior leader in operations and supply chain, how do I look at this whole digital? And what we are arguing is that it'll be important for us to reimagine the way we look at operation supply chain if you want to take advantage of a digital. If you look at historically this as operations and supply chain leaders, essentially there have been certain changes one has seen over last century in some sense. If you go back exactly 100 years back, Ford Motor Company had done a major revolution, and since then, but that point in time they were talking about any color as long as black and any model as long as Model T. And from that we have come a long way. And essentially, now the challenge has been that instead of talking about just one product, you talk about a huge variety, almost to the extent of, can we offer a customization? That's a direction in which we've been going. Simultaneously, what we're also seeing is, I mean, in some sense, it's related that once you start talking about either huge variety, you're also seeing a lot more uncertainty in demand. So that's been, a challenge for all, professionals when we look at this whole operation supply chain. Now, so when we look at this digital, now there are two different ways people have talked about. One is people talk about as a fourth revolution, right? In the earlier three revolution, first when we got a steam engine. So instead of using animal or a muscle power, we started using steam engine. From steam engine, second revolution was when electrical motors came in. So with that result, we replaced steam by electrical motors and led to sort of assembly line and several others. Third was the whole information technology, ICT revolution. And now we're dealing with a fourth, which is a digital, right? So that's one way people have looked at it. Other way, there are MIT professor, whom I'm going to refer probably sometime during the talk, is Professor McAfee and Professor Bryjonson, who talks about more as a second machine age. So they talk about only saying, okay, first time we replace, muscle power with machine, and now we are bringing in this whole digital technology. Now, I'm sure, you look at any organization, if I look at this last decade, you will find whether you're in a pharmaceutical, whether you're automobile, whether you're retail, right? I think most of us have been watching from a sidelines. All those interesting things happening, right? So you see, for example, Amazon, right? First saying that I'm offering you huge variety, and initially saying reliable delivery in almost a week or a couple of days. And we've been seeing that shrinking timeline. We started talking about 2 days. Then now in certain cities, you're talking about few hours. Similarly, we've been seeing a whole lot of things happening globally. When Nike talking about, the way can I give a customized shoe, right? So several such initiatives have been going on. The G talking about whole predicts platform. But, for most of us, people felt that I can afford to wait in a sideline. I can afford that once I'll figure it out what all this means, then I'll implement because we have a good execution. And then pandemic happened. So suddenly, I'm saying already we were seeing some of these forces. What I'm going to argue that I don't think any one of us can afford to just be in a sideline and say, let me figure it out, at some point in time, and then we'll take our time. As I said, there are primarily because, this revolution is very different from earlier revolution. If you look at essentially the scale, the speed, and the scope at which it operates, it doesn't give us that kind of luxury. So with a result, it's imperative that all of us do look at it seriously, because there's both opportunity as well as a threat. We don't have that kind of luxury saying, and as I said, pandemic has essentially been like a catalyst which has accelerated this. What I'm going to do is to, essentially, divide my opening remarks into two parts. First, I'm going to focus, which I already started, where essentially why it's imperative, and we cannot afford to just say, I'll watch it from a sideline. The second part, I'm going to focus on saying that if you want to look at it, you'll have to reimagine your operations. And I'm going to, through certain illustration, talk about what does this reimagination mean and what are the various elements. But then also going to argue that why it's going to be hard, the reimagination. At the other time, I'll get into execution, but essentially we'll focus more on just understanding your questions and answer them. So, today, when you look at this digital, we talk about a large number of technologies, right? And what I'm arguing is that each of those technology now is actually proven. It's no longer a worked at the toy problem. There are companies which have implemented at a scale. So we're not dealing with, not proven or just tested. Let me just couple of them with example. For example, you talk about IoT or Internet of Things, right? Now, there are already companies, for example, the Amazon puts, sensors on the shelves in the retail, in their physical store. Zara puts RFID, right? So then talk about merchandise replacement, right? Nestle is talking about vending machine with automatic replenishment. Now, these are all, done at a scale. So all this idea that here is something which is already there. You talk about, we in a supply chain, we keep talking about a demand-driven supply chain, smart supply chains. And you will find, whether we talk about analytics, using analytics to manage this. So you find, for example, Kimberly and Clark and P&G have been giving their daily demand to the suppliers. They've improved their forecasting accuracy by a significant amount using a whole lot of analytics. So similarly, we talk about Amazon and Flipkart, right? So we are talking about this demand-driven supply chain, right? Whether we talk about stocking, each of the decision which we talk about in a supply chain, people have been using analytics significantly to achieve these goals. You talk about, industrial IoT, right? And Siemens has this factory at Hamburg, right, in Germany, where you talk about a Six Sigma quality. You're talking about 12 million units of PLC made in a year. This is almost 1 per second, each being unique. And there you have a product talking to machine, machine talking to machine, right? Already there, proven. You talk about robotics, right? You look at this Amazon warehouses. All of us have seen those videos, right? And one of the reasons why you're able to talk about such a short delivery time in hours is part of what has happened in those use of robotics in Amazon warehouse. Similarly, you find, you look at a Tesla factory, right? The use of robotics in each one of them. Right? You talk about digital twins, right? Now, all of us have talked about experimentation. And we used to do a saying that if I want to understand some phenomena, I would abstract it, build a simulation. But now you talk about a digital twins where you're saying I'm replicating the entire factory in the same form digitally. I can test out everything, experiment, and then finally implement. Unilever has already done this, right? So I'm saying you look at each one of them, right? Again, augmented reality, right? People have been using this, Google Glasses and others thing in design, assembly, testing, training, maintenance, 3D printing, So I'm saying when I look at each of this technology, they are no longer, we're saying people are still trying to figure it out. People have done it at a scale. So I think today we are no longer in a situation where you're saying, unless somebody else has proven it, I don't want to even look at it. We're already there. Okay. Now, the reason again I'm saying is if you look at each of this, for example, what has happened to Amazon in last few years, just see this 3 issue which I talked about: a scale, speed, and scope. Now, earlier revolution, I had the time and luxury. And we're saying today, we do not have that, right? That's the reason I'm saying it's a business imperative, which has got accelerated by pandemics, right? That I need to look at it and see what do I do with it. Now, when I look at this whole phenomenon, we're going to argue that, you shouldn't just look at some individual pieces and say, okay, I have this piece. Can I replace this existing one with this and improve the local efficiency? We're saying what will be important is to just reimagine, right, the way you do several things. And we're going to talk about reimagination at 4 different levels. Okay. And let me just illustrate with 1 or 2 examples. One, I will take the existing example. One, I will take a more, what I can see a potential kind of, So for example, I'm going to take up this example of Zerodha, which is a stockbroking firm, internet-based stock trading. Now, today, it's the largest stock trading firm in India. 15% of trading happens on Zerodha platform. It's a firm which just started in 2010. Okay. What is interesting is that if you want to start trading on that platform today, you can do that, where you say, okay, I want to start an account, and just today itself, you can start trading. Now, how have they done some of this? Right? Okay. One of the biggest challenge used to be that essentially KYC, right? So if I want to open an account, typically what would happen is if I reach out to any broker, right, they'll send me a series of forms to fill up. Either their agent, will give me those forms. I'll fill up those forms along with the PAN card and, whatever set of documentation required. And usually it'll take about 3 weeks to 1 month before I can start trading. And as I said, one of the biggest challenge was this KYC. Now, what happened is there were several parallel things happening, and where government started allowing eKYC, and some of the firms like Digio started offering that service, which initially were for a banks and other. Zerodha saw this as an opportunity where they said, can I integrate this with my platform? And with a result, I can do this complete digitally, right? I don't need any physical paper, and I should be able to do it in less than a day. And with a result, their costs are low. And now if you look at, what they've done, they've not invented any new technology. They've actually, what I would use the term, essentially a lot of mixing and matching of technologies. And I'm going to come back to this issue again. I think as a business, none of us are expected to actually invent a technology. Can I do, and that's, argument several people have used, that actually, most of the innovations have taken where people have used this existing technology, right, and done some mixing and matching in a way that can give a unique value proposition. So essentially, they were not just using technology for the sake of it. They were trying to solve this problem. What's a business problem I'm trying to solve? I'm trying to solve a business problem, which is saying, people, once they have intent, they would like to start trading as soon as possible, and saying, can I solve this business problem? They looked at an ecosystem, right? And they saw this opportunity where somebody has done this part of eKYC. Can I integrate this? So I'm going to argue that when we talk about reimagination, obviously you're going to talk about reimagine the way you organize your operations, the way you add value. You need to, reimagine in the way you mix and match those technologies. You're going to reimagine your business model itself sometimes. Because finally, what do we do? So we are essentially saying, either I look at my, when I look at as an operations supply chain leader, I look at myself as, either looking at 3 flows, either a material or a value addition flow, information flow, and a financial flow to deliver bundle of goods and service to customer. So essentially, we are saying we are reimagining the way we are going to manage this, and sometimes reimagine the way we are adding value to end customer. And So we're saying mix and match of technology, the reimagine business model, reimagine your delivery, which is in terms of your operation supply chain, and reimagine the way you're going to use various partner systems. So you're not going to do anything alone. So for example, whether look at Zerodha, right? They use several other partners to finally deliver whatever they want. Let me take another example just to illustrate this from a kind of area where I do more my work. For example, look at industrial spares. So for example, I'm a Caterpillar, right? I have my equipment which could be in mines and all over the place within India. Now, one of the biggest challenges that when the equipment fails, I want to make sure the equipment is up immediately. Now, what are the challenges? I have many models. So I have to stock the spare parts, large number of spare parts, right? Somewhere closer to my customer segments. Now, this is a classic problem which we as an academic as well as consultants love, because it's a very complex problem. That I have a large number of this spare parts, my customer base, all over world or even just India, right? So first, how do I make sure if I have a premium customer, I need to make sure his machine is up within few hours. How do I make sure the spare is made available? Second, it's not just spare. It'll also require expertise. There'll be a skill level if I want to replace that spare. So making sure I'm able to make available that spare at a right time with the right level of skill, right? Now this becomes a huge challenge. Now suddenly you can start looking at this in a very different way. With the 3D printing technology, suddenly say, do I need to physically store this part? Right? So suddenly my whole challenge, the way I had looked at, otherwise typically what is done, we have done a lot of optimization in each of those individual pieces. Now we are saying is, can I reimagine this whole business in terms of I'm going to not keep physical, spares. I'm going to use digital, this 3D printing. Today it's a mature technology. Can I use this 3D printing to print, this part very close to customer? Similarly, I don't need the kind of skill I needed earlier. Can I use the maintenance person who's going to do it at an average skill level? I'm not saying you can put anybody, but I don't need that super specialized skill. And using augmented reality, right, and wearables, actually, I should be able to help the person who's going to replace this. So certainly using, 3D printing, augmented reality, wearables, I'm able to reimagine this whole supply chain. I can go one step further. For example, if I'm dealing with a turbine, now my customer who bought turbine from me is not interested in turbine per se, but he's using this to produce power, right? Similarly, there's an uptime which I'm talking about. Can I move my business now to service, actually? Rather than saying I'm selling you asset, can I talk about this as a service, which is what has happened in cloud computing, right? Rather than selling you a server, I'm giving you essentially, the cloud, space on the cloud. So now suddenly the kind of partners you would need are different. To ask this question, that obviously I would need those files, right, in a different format now, right? I can't just use a CAD format. I'll have to prepare a files in the form electronic files, which will be, I would have to ask this question: would I put up those printing these things, or will I have a service provider, who would put up these things and offer that service to large number of users? What I'm saying is, I'm talking about a mixing and matching of technology. I'm talking about a reimagining the way I look at my whole, chain, which I was talking about. I'm even reimagining, can I look at my business in a different way of, instead of supplying spares, can I talk about service, right? And the way I look at this whole business ecosystem in terms of partners which are going to be there. Now, so I want to do this reimagination at all this level. Now, why is this very difficult? Now, history tells us that for most legacy firms, this is extremely difficult. And the reimagination, and I'll just illustrate with these two examples which are there, in the literature from history. So we have this, Professor Paul David of Stanford, who has a very interesting work where he talks about a productivity paradox, where he compares what is happening now with what happened when, we moved from a steam engine to electrical motor. And it's very fascinating. He plots, he looks at the data for almost 30 to 40 years. Now, if you typically go and look at any plant factory in 19th century, where I'm using steam as a prime mover of energy, essentially what would happen is I would have one large, steam engine. Then I would have a shaft where through pulleys and several other these things, it'll get transferred to all the equipments which I need energy. So with a result, my whole design, the way I would design a plant would be that if this is my prime mover, my whole plant should be around that, almost like a spherical form, right? With a result, factory would be typically multi-story factory, 3-story factory, right? And everything, there's no concept of a material flow. You design it around steam engine. Now, when the electrical motor came, what people did was just replaced the steam engine with the electrical motor. So if I had 100 kilowatt equivalent of steam engine, I just put 100 kilowatt motor. Rest of the factory was same. It took almost 30 years where people started saying, now I no longer need to work with a one large electric motor. I can actually have this source of energy for every equipment. Then I can actually redesign my whole factory in a way it'll follow the material movement. So I could have a just single floor, follow the way material movement happened, and design my layout around it. But this took 30 years. Because for me, when you give me a steam engine to electrical motor, I looked at just as a source of energy and I just replaced it. It was definitely efficient, but the efficiency I got was so marginal because I had not reimagined the way I should look at a factory floor. And I said it took 30 years. It's a fascinating story in terms of how the whole thing got evolved. That idea that I can have an individual motor, all this took a long time. The second example I will talk about is, Professor Jaykumar of Harvard. He has a very interesting article called Post-Industrial Manufacturing. So when we are doing a third revolution, one of the important development was a flexible manufacturing systems. And he studied the way people were deploying flexible manufacturing systems. And he found that there were very, very few. So he classified them into two categories. One category which was using flexible manufacturing system well, others were not using, and most were not using it very well. The major difference they found was the most of the organizations were not exploiting flexibility at all. So I have these 3-4 machines which have been connected as a flexible manufacturing unit. But if you look at the number of parts or products which I was manufacturing, in most of the companies, so if you compare with those leaders who decided to look at flexible manufacturing system a different way, the ratio was a 10:1. That means typical company would produce 10 type of, let's say, components. The leaders would manufacture 100. Similarly, number of new products, the ratio is to be 22:1. So it was quite fascinating that by the time he studied flexible manufacturing system, it was already mature technology. So what I'm arguing is that when you see a new technology coming in, the legacy plays a huge role. And somehow our mindset is such that we will actually just think of as, can I replace the steam engine with a electric motor, rather than saying what are the capabilities this electrical motor provides to reimagine the way I was saying, can I look at my, the industrial spares in a different way, right? Let me just probably take 2 minutes to close this and take our questions. Now, obviously, there are going to be a whole lot of execution challenges. But any transformation, this is not the first time we are doing transformation. So there's a fair amount of knowledge involved in what are the challenges in the transformation. Obviously, we're going to have those challenges. Challenges of coordination, challenges of the business continuity. I have an existing business going on, right? So we can get into that whole part of a transformation. I mean, in terms of, I think it's a known. Okay, so can we use that knowledge when we talk about this whole transformation? In my view, it's a great opportunity for, I mean, I look at much more from operation supply chain, but also for business leaders. Honestly, similar opportunity came to somebody in India was only in 90s, when economy opened up. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us at this point in time. As I argued, we're dealing with a proven technology, each of them individually. I think the challenge remains the reimagination. And I think we don't have that luxury because, as I said, this revolution, as we are seeing, the speed, scope, and scale is very different. So if you say, I'm just going to watch from a sideline, figure out only when I'm ready for it, it may be too late. It's a great opportunity, but it's also a scary thought that somebody's going to just come and eat your lunch. Yeah. So let me stop here and take questions.
Thank you very much. I think this has spurred a canvas that is much, much larger, but the fundamental principles have been that digital is right there and you cannot wait on the sidelines. You will have to participate in the sense that it is a business imperative and things have been advanced or hastened by the pandemic. From an internet trading company to a turbine or industrial spares, the examples have been very, very clear and telling. Thank you very much, sir, for this session, and we will come back to you with the questions. Meanwhile, may I take the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Professor R. Prasad, who is also an alumnus of IIT Bombay and IIM Calcutta. He has a rich experience of 3 decades, both in industry as well as academics. He is currently the director for academic wing at ICFAI Group, and he's also the architect of the online MBA program, which was recently launched. I take pleasure in welcoming Professor R. Prasad to start moderating the session. Professor R. Prasad, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar. Very good evening, sir. It is indeed a pleasure to interact with a very senior alumni. I was about 9 to 10 years your junior at IIT Mumbai from the Department of Electrical Engineering. Sir, the session has turned very interesting. The 2 highlights that you have brought up, particularly that the intro phase is over and now we are into the growth phase and we need to do something about it. This is one part. And the second part is that you need to reimagine and not replace. And this question will come up later towards the end of the session. I think all the while I was thinking about education and whatever you were saying has its implications in terms of reimagination and not replacement. I think we have a full section on that towards the end. So we have got a lot of queries, 100+ queries from our audience, and we have divided into sections. So between Professor Sudhakar and me, we will take each section. So I'll start with your permission, sir. I'll start with the first.
I think I'm going to say they are very difficult question. I'll take it to my colleague, Professor Sai Prasad, right? Sure. No, go ahead.
Okay. So the first section, the first question that is the first question is, what is the scope and importance of operations and supply chain management in today's world? Can we say that today product success depends on supply chain? And what are the flaws in the current supply chain? This is the first set, sir.
Sure. So I think it's an interesting question, because when you see the whole whole this digital technology, you will see interesting thing. There are firms which are only investing in a front end, right? Because they say that's what is a customer facing. I'm going to get a. There are firms which are investing in a back end, in operation supply chain. Some investing in both. Relatively, we find there's a more investment in the front end, right? Now, my own view is, obviously I'm biased. My own view is, if you want a sustainable competitive advantage, right, you will have to invest in the back end. It could be as simple example as that, it could be very simple application like, some people talk about, the Starbucks has this app where globally, wherever I am, I can place an order and pick it up. But I'm saying, if you don't tie it up with the back end, because you have this whole operations which is serving existing customer at a store, as well as this, in all omni-channel, this is going to happen, right? Now, if I have not taken care of a whole capacity at their end, similarly ensuring that when this person comes up, actually he or she would get the call. So I'm saying, if you don't invest in a back end, right, the front end alone is not going to. And I'm saying relatively, because front end, what you're going to do is going to be visible to everybody. So the chances is going to be get copied is much faster, right? I'm saying the back end is which is going to give you sustained. So that's where I believe that, it's important that you invest in it. You asked a very interesting question that what are the flaws when we look at currently? The biggest flaw I find is we're all inward looking, so you get lost into efficiency, right? Somewhere you lose sight of a customer. I find this so often when you talk to anybody, people will say, but I need minimum batch size of 10. Now, if you're going to move to a customization, what's the meaning of a batch size? So I'm saying, asking this question, that what is my customer looking for, right? Somewhere we find in most of the operations, customer is not at the center. We need to bring customer at the center, right? There are challenges, I'm not denying that. But unless you bring customer at the center of your operation supply chain, right, you're going to do a whole lot of things and figure out later on that it had no connect to what either business was trying to do. So to me, bringing customer at a center is going to be very important.
Thank you, sir. Being customer focused and then investing in the back end and tying up the front end with the back end so that you have a competitive advantage. These are the key takeaways from this question. The next question, sir, is how does the supply chain need reimagining with digital?
So I think there are two ways. One is as I said, traditionally we have looked at certain ways, right? When we look at, a lot of time we talk about, here is my plant, I'm talking about right now physical this thing. So here is my plant, here is my warehouse, here is my customer, these are the way transportation route. And a lot of time we get, you're just focusing on that part. Now you start from saying, you have to always start from a customer, right? And saying, so that's why I give a spare parts business. What I'm trying to do is to give that, my customer saying, whenever your equipment fails, right, I will ensure that equipment will be up in 2 hours. And I'm saying we didn't get into that part. Actually, I would go one step back. I would say I would now have a sensor on the machine. With a result, I will not allow equipment to fail, right? So the combination of 3D printing, using variables, and sensors, I'll start. That's why I could start talking about giving whole thing as a service, right? So I think that idea, reimagine, start from what is the service you're providing and work backward, right? If you do that, you will find the way you would look at this would be different from saying, can I do more automation in my warehouse? Otherwise, you would work in that silos where each one is interesting. I see. So what will happen is I'll see the I see this Amazon warehouse, and I say I want to replicate that in my warehouse, right? So what is happening is I'm looking at those pieces, right? For example, I have a older ERP where the time itself I'm working with, I run once in 2 days kind of thing. Now, if I'm my customer who is going to talk about delivery within 2 hours, to relook at all those things, right? So the planning horizon. So I'm saying you again start from a customer and then look at it. Then there's a higher chance, right, that you would look at a lot of these ideas in a very different way.
Thank you, sir. I think, it's about looking at the customer and reframing the problem and then
Absolutely.
working backwards and
connecting
it.
Very correctly, reframing it. It's not, don't look at in the way you traditionally you looked at it. Traditionally we had broken down in some particular way, right?
Yes.
I'm saying that first we should remove that filter.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very, very fundamental point. The next question is about what are the advantages and disadvantages of digital and supply chain management with respect to economic, social, environmental dimensions, both the pluses and minuses.
So for example, you look at this whole e-commerce, right? Now we have seen a boom, but environmentally it is not friendly, right? For example, look at amount of packaging waste we are doing. Similarly, all of us know that when you're shipping unit level, right, it is inefficient. Now, so we're saying, from a sustainability point of view, right? So that's one part, which is area of concern. So I'm going to go probably all over the place, but second is going to be, sometimes you can get carried away by using technology which are not proven. I don't think honestly you should ever get into that space. For example, I see a lot of people getting excited by blockchain. Now, I think we are really far away from using blockchain in supply chain, right? I would like to see, the way I'd argued in all the cases, a proof of concept which is done at a scale, right? Okay, because you can't use that for the transactions. It's very inefficient, right? So you got to figure it out how we are going to how we're going to do some of this, is something which we'll have to see.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you. So 2 points which have come out is one with respect to sustainability, which needs to be examined and then we need to see what to do about it. And the second is that don't get carried away by technology and be very realistic about it. The next question, sir, is how do you see the role of digital in supply chain management, startups and MSME in particular? What would happen to middlemen and agents?
Yeah, so one is, you're going to keep asking, what is the value you're adding? If you're not adding a value, you don't have a place. For example, I still remember I was talking to a group of freight forwarders and I said, what's the value you add? So I said, if you're not adding value, you might put some regulations and all that so that extend your life for a few more years. But if you're not adding a value, then you're not going to survive. So I think to some extent, I think this middleman term, we have to be very careful. For example, all platforms are middlemen, right? So yes, it's not that middleman is going to go away. The question which you're asking is, Somebody can say, I'm also middleman, right? There's a whole lot of researchers who are doing research. I curate information and give you, right? So I think the question is not, whether you're a middleman or not. And the question is, are you adding a value, right? So for example, you go to small scale, right? Now I find if I'm offering a bundle of goods and service, which is exactly same as large guy, there's no way I can compete. I don't have economy of scale, right? Now, so for example, then I have to ask a question, what is it this large fellow cannot do in terms of service, which I should be able to offer, right? Okay. So there are still, you find neighborhood kirana stores who had been giving a service earlier also, right? There's a relationship, there's a personalization. So I think you got to keep asking that question, that why would Amazon not replace me? If I don't answer that question, I will not survive. So I think the question is not so much as, so obviously there are economy of scale which comes in, but you could also argue that to some extent, some part of a digital also give you level playing field, right? Because in some activities, for example, I can also use a cloud, right? Now cloud is available to me even if I'm a startup. So suddenly I also have a level playing field because of digital. Because digital, the whole advantage is that marginal cost is zero, right? So I'm able to actually get those services which earlier I would have to struggle. So the key is, how do I use those existing players, right, in a way that finally I give a service, which is valued by a customer. Obviously now I'm not talking about a large number of customers, right? I'm a small or medium scale player. What do I bring to a table, to a target group, right? So I got to keep asking that question, but at the same time, none of that going to be like something you solve for all your life, right? Okay. So, but I think I would say, again, reimagination is a big problem, right? And taking advantage of existing, there are a whole lot of things happening. So scanning environment, can I take advantage of it?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think that's a very, very interesting answer. And I think it goes a long way to how particularly startups and MSMEs can reimagine, leverage a lot of new things which have come up, which are working, and then figure out what is the value that you can add with respect to the customer segments, which customer segments, and how you are different from the others, and then go into that particular space. This is what it looks like. Thank you, sir. I think we come to the end of the first section. So I would now hand it over to Professor Sudhakar to look at the second section.
Thank you. It's getting interesting as Professor is answering the questions. Sir, I very clearly remember the examples that you have mentioned in terms of technologies. The examples that you have given are in terms of Amazon, Nestle, Kimberly-Clark, so on and so forth. But the question here is what I'm going to read out. What does digital mean in Industry 5.0? What are the technologies involved? And what's the role of technologies like IoT, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, 3D printing, so on and so forth in digitizing the supply chain and role of ERP in business organizations? I know some of these you have addressed, but I thought I'll bring it up again.
So I think, all I'm saying is you'll have to start by saying what's a problem you're trying to solve, right? And then use a mix and match of technology. So obviously ERP will remain, ERP is not going to go away, but you're putting a lot of this on top of it. The only thing area you'll have to be careful is your existing ERP should not become an obstacle. As I was mentioning examples, some of the older ERPs, if they run only once in 2 days and your delivery time you need to do, which is a few hours, then that ERP will become a bottleneck, right? Otherwise, you do want to take that ERP, right? And on top of that, but I'm saying it'll be very difficult to answer saying, depending on your specific product, depending on a sector, you're going to choose that range of technologies, right? So for example, if I'm a pharmaceutical, it's possible traceability is very important to me, right? Because I'm worried about counterfeit. So what I'm going to look for is different from what somebody else is going to look at. Somebody else maybe, if I'm offering cosmetics where based on your skin, I'm offering a solution. I'm looking at a range of technologies which are very different, right? So I would hesitate to say that, you'll have to do that mix and match depending on what's important to you, right? Obviously, each of them, for example, a whole lot of people would be able to, especially if I'm having a large number of products, then in forecasting using AI/ML will become important, right? But somewhere I will also have to make sure I use combination of human and this together. Because, finally, when I talk about AI/ML, I'm still talking about past patterns, right? And if there are certain changes which has happened in environment, it could be regulation, it could be competition, right? I mean, I should be incorporating that, right? So more a smarter combination of, especially when I'm dealing with the forecasting and some of those issues, right? It'll be important to, so again, I'm saying you will use a mix and match. And if somebody comes back and tell me I'm using all of them without understanding anything, I can tell you're going to be failure, right? If somebody says that, because you're not, you're not asking what's a problem I'm trying to solve. I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by this, that's one of the worst thing you can do, right? Because it's a business problem we are solving. So learn from every, and finally, a lot of you would remember when Walmart talked about RFID in 2003. All of us thought, if Walmart is taking such a big push, it means there's a solved problem. Finally, it was still a failure for Walmart itself in 2007, right? So I'm saying still, when you're looking at a technology, you will still have to learn. So a lot of it will be experiment, learn, make changes as you go along, right? So I would say in general, don't put big bets, okay? Keep learning and experimenting. So I don't know whether it answers that question. Because
yes, it does. The fascination for buzzwords is not going to take us anywhere, but study the problem carefully and apply the right technology to solve sector-specific, segment-specific problems. That's fantastic, sir. Now we move to the second question in this segment. What is the status of implementation in the robotic process automation in Indian manufacturing, and what could be the challenges?
So I think one of the key things which has happened is the prices have dropped dramatically, right? So this is what is a big issue now, that its prices have dropped. So it's allowed us to use the way we would have never imagined, right? But finally, still, it's going to be an optimal mix. We're not going to be like a Tesla factory, right? The kind of labor cost we have, right? So I think still, even though the prices have dropped, we'll have to still talk about optimal use. Now, it's still possible. In certain cases, it may not be from a purely the economics perspective. For example, in a pharmaceutical, right, I may want to remove human touch. So I bring in, okay, the robotics for that perspective. There could be cases where I want a complete reliability, right? I bring in, so I'm saying partly nature of application and partly economics. Together, will answer some of those questions as we go along.
Great, sir. Thank you very much for that answer. So these advanced planning and scheduling softwares, do they give us the best efficiencies which integrates with supply chain management?
Again, you have to ask the question, what's the problem you're solving, right? Now, if you're in an environment where uncertainty is so high, right, then, you're going to focus more on designing everything from a responsive perspective that's going to be your, bigger solution, that how do you make everything responsive, right? Rather than saying, can I have a advanced planning and scheduling software? If that is helping you responsive, go ahead, right? So I would say, I know I'm repeating myself. I think the key question is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? If you don't start from there, if I'm selling you the advanced planning softwares, right? For example, forecasting. If whatever you do, there are some businesses where forecasting is going to be extremely poor. I would not waste energy in forecasting. If I'm in a fashion business, in a short life cycle kind of thing, my focus will remain on responsiveness. So I think, I need to, so let me give an example, which is a little old example, but I still remember. I remember sitting in a presentation, but this is a long back, so not probably valid now also, but it stays with me. I had this company, I don't want to name the company, which said SAP has given us award that we are a power user because we are using so many functionalities of SAP. And I asked myself, and he gave me number of constraints, number of this, and all that. I said, you are one of the most simple manufacturing firm. Okay. Why have you made your problem so complicated? Right? Now, the SAP had this whole notion of power user is so many equations, so many constraints, so many variables. To me, it was completely false. Right? Ideally, it had a simple manufacturing, the distribution was more complex, sourcing was more complex. They ended up spending a lot of energy in modeling their entire manufacturing, which relative was, so to me, this fascination for, the technology can be dysfunctional. So keeping, I know sometimes you'll do certain things for learning, and that's fine. It's important to keep learning, right? But when it comes to finally implementation, you got to keep asking that hard question. What's a business problem I'm solving?
Great, sir. Thank you. Again and again, it is boiling down to the same question. What business problem am I solving rather than...
business problem and a customer. There are two, mantras which unfortunately, problem with operations and supply chain is they forget that, there's an elegance, we are all, get carried away by elegance, right? Which is very fascinating. But you're not trying to impress another supply chain professional, which is what we end up doing sometimes, right? My solution can be very crude sometimes, but if it is more appropriate for my business, nothing wrong in that.
Right, sir. So scan the environment, and if it is an uncertain environment where you have to be responsive, that be the solution plug rather than an advanced planning. Fantastic, sir. Thank you very much. We move to the next point, sir. How does digitization impact the operations and marketing streams altogether?
So what's going to happen in general is, obviously we've been talking about very general these things. Now, those products and services, for example, which are more information intensive, it's much easier to do a digitization, right? So you will see that part, in this whole spectrum. Relatively, that's why Zerodha is a classic example, which is 100%, information intensive. So there, my whole idea would be, it's much easier to convert these things into digital. But in general, the whole idea is, whatever is a physical, wherever possible, if I can convert into digitize. Now, everything you can't, right? I want a banana, it'll remain a banana, right? But still, there are whole parts of it which I may be able to digitize. So when I look at this whole information flow, financial flow, value flow, right? You keep asking this question, what part of it I can digitize, right? That will create opportunity of, using more digital technology as we go along. I know I've not answered the way it was posed, but I think the key issue is in terms of looking at this whole thing in terms of this flows and saying, look at those flows and how do I use this? One is a digitize, right? Because then I can use this same thing is for a data, right? If data, I'm an insurance company, I get a photograph, right? Of a car which is, failed, right? There's an accident. Now I need to use that as an information. How do I digitize that? Right? Then, okay. So I think the question is all kinds of data which is going to be there. How do I convert into a digital in a way I can use some of this technology?
Yes, sir, it does answer. Look at the flows in terms of material flow, information flow, and finance flow, and then apply digital over there and solve problems. Thank you, sir. I would now request Professor Prasad to initiate the next cluster of questions.
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar. I think, sir, it is increasingly looking like a framework of business strategy where you have the customer, you would study the environment, you'd look at the competition, you'd look at the technology trends, you would look at what are your internal strengths, and then see how to mix and match in terms of how this is coming out to be. This section, sir, is about trends, challenges, and opportunities in the digitized supply chain. So the first, there are two questions here. So the first is, what are the supply chain trends and technology trends as of today, with particular reference to India, and how are they relevant and beneficial?
I mean, maybe I'm going to just repeat myself. Okay. I think you need to understand. I mean, so our basic classification don't go away. Okay. For example, our standard Fishers, the things of responsive supply chain versus efficient. To me, that will always remain a core. Okay. That am I dealing with the problem of managing responsiveness? Then the way I deal with the issues is very different from the way I look at efficiency. So I mean, that will be a starting point, right? Similarly, I'll keep asking this question that, there are a whole lot of, ideas we talk about in supply chain in terms of pooling, saying, can I do pooling across geographies? Can I do pooling across products? Can I do pooling across products, geography, time, right? Now, because the business, the fundamentals of operation supply chain tell me that if I can pool something, right, I can bring down uncertainty. And that gives me opportunity to change the way I manage. So for example, a lot of ideas of postponement, right? Do I work with a configure to order? So to me, those basic frameworks will never go away, right? Similarly, one concept we talk about is a value density. Am I dealing with a product which has relatively, inventory more important or a transportation, right? I mean, if you're doing a cement or a grocery vis-a-vis electronic parts. So to me, a lot of those, you're going to keep asking those questions in terms of, do I want to relook at, am I currently in a made to stock, can I move to made to order? So to me, those basic concepts, those push-pull boundaries, all those don't go away. What we are saying is, what this new technology do is change the nature of trade-offs, right? Earlier, it's very similar to what cloud has done, right? Suddenly I can say I don't longer have to make a decision about how many servers I need. I can go on this, but that does not mean that I should, so there are companies which said, if once I move to mature level, I'm a startup or a growth phase, cloud is a great solution. There are companies which says that once I've reached certain level, and if I'm a stable environment, I'm not growing and I am stable, then maybe I will bring it back on my premises, which is what Dropbox did actually. So I think this whole idea that there is not the solution which is valid for all the time to come, right? So you're going to keep relooking at all these issues and say how. So for example, we talked about this issue of a 3D printing. No, I'm not going to use 3D printing for my normal standard components. The economics is still not reached there, right? But there are certain special category of components where, again, so I think the question you're asking is, what's the nature of trade-off which has changed because of this technology? And that gives you opportunity to relook at some of this. So I would, as I said, you could say that I have basically very simple toolkit, which is, I'm repeating myself again and again, which is saying that, look, You understand new technology for in terms of what does it do to your trade-offs, because of which you took certain decision. Now you're saying the nature of trade-offs have changed, the way we talked about 3D printing, right? It allows you to look at certain part of solutions in a different way. But it's also possible, I gave a Dropbox example, give us saying, your environment has changed, business environment. So same solution, which is valid for everybody else, is not valid for you. So I would say, I think most time in just understanding your own business, right? And asking that question that what does this technology do in terms of nature of trade-offs? And then see, rather than getting carried away by trends and all that, because solution which is valid for you is not going to be valid for me. In a same pharma business, you looking for something else, I'm looking for a cold chain traceability. Each one of us in a pharma, right? But the for example, I mean, we looked at all this pharma, the oxygen issues, right? I mean, to me, the way Nandarbar in Maharashtra looked at that problem was the most creative, right? They were trying to solve the problem. So they came up with the idea of oxygen nurse. To me, it was the most creative solution, right? So I don't think, I mean, we should never forget that technology is only a means to solve a problem. It cannot be end by itself.
Thank you, sir. I think there is a need to keep reiterating the fundamentals that you're talking about. I think that is because, both management and technology has got a lot of jargon today. And they may very well be confusing the basics. The basics always remain. And I think that's what you're reiterating. Like we used to say, get back to the fundas
Yes.
kind of a thing. And if you do that and then relate these questions with respect to either economics or with respect to human behavior or with respect to customer, and then do the trade-offs, I think the responses will come. This is what I could understand, sir.
Yeah. So I think what is more important is what is the question you're going to ask? When I meet a technology guy, obviously at no point in time, any one of us is going to become a specialist. So I think understanding what's a question I need to ask. To me, that's most important, which will help you understand this, what is the nature of trade-off, what would it do to your business?
Yes, I think this too is a very fundamental point. If you ask the right question, and I think that is where most of the time needs to go.
Yeah.
And then all the other things fall into place. Yeah.
I think what happens is, this whole, what people call FOMO, which is a fear of missing out, right? So am I missing something? I'm not implementing blockchain. Am I missing something, right?
Yeah.
I think that creates a huge problem.
Fine, sir. I think, we are at about 15 minutes past our time. So I'd hand it back to Professor Sudhakar for the next section.
Sir, I take the liberty of going through the next set of questions, although we are beyond time.
Sure.
These questions, some of them are repetitive because of the nature of the subject itself. And then I must confess that I'm able to understand the subject much better now than so many years back when you were teaching us in the class.
Yeah, so part of blame should go to me, but that's okay.
Sir, this set of questions is related to the pandemic situation.
Sure.
Largely the role and impact of supply chain during COVID-19 and how the pandemic has forced manufacturing sector to rethink their supply chain network and how to improve efficiency of supply chain in lockdown. Basically what it says is how the HoReCa sectors, the hotels, restaurants and cafes be advised to bounce back and what kind of things that they should work on in the supply chain.
It's a very complex issue. That do you plan for a once in a century situation, and do you expect individual business to do it, or do you expect larger society to do it? I think honestly, there's a difference between, suppose I'm in Orissa, where there are cyclones which happen quite often. Then I need to design my operations supply chain to handle cyclone. Because like Bombay, right? The rains are going to happen whenever rains happen, flooding will, all that, the roads, but you can't expect somebody who is not in earthquake prone zone to plan for an earthquake. So I think somewhere we are missing, this larger question. If somebody tells me that each business must plan for a pandemic which is once in a century event. I think that's not done honestly. Okay. But should we plan as a society? Answer is yes. So for example, I mean, I'm disturbed by a lot of debate about, for example, oxygen. I mean, you can't expect a private sector to solve that problem where oxygen would be needed, once in 100 years at that level. Now, I don't know what's going to happen to all those fellows who put up a capacity, honestly, right? You forced fellows and people put in money. They're not going to actually, none of them are going to make money on that, actually. Okay. So I think there is a difference in the way you prepare yourself for a once in 100-year event, once in every year event, right? Once in 5-year event. I think we are all mixing too many things. I hope we don't learn long lessons. I mean, obviously we'll have to manage pandemic. Like every, whether we go back to Spanish flu, whether these things, finally mankind has always moved on. The way you solve issues which are once in 100 years is different from, I think unfortunately, a lot of us are learning wrong lessons. I'm saying we need to survive. I think there's no doubt on that, right? All of us will have to find our own solutions. But if somebody tells me that, do I find a long-term solution for it? I mean, I would honestly say, then you will learn a lot of wrong lessons because you can't prepare. So it's like simply saying, in 73, there was an oil shock. So that means every private company has to keep planning for an oil shock. That's not the way to work. Those kind of shocks has to be planned centrally. You cannot expect everybody to hold inventory for that or a spare capacity for it. So I think, what I'm seeing is, I'm saying, obviously all of us will have to survive. So I think, and a lot of us will have to do jugaad, find solutions and all that. But if somebody tells me that this is the permanent solution, I refuse to buy that. Second, if because of that you learn certain new ideas, for example, in education sector, we learned online, we use it. So I'm saying there are certain things you learned, see how does it fit. Okay, don't go back to completely normal. But at the same time, don't say that all my life it's going to be with pandemic. I think there are deeper, there are issues you do at a firm level. There are issues we do at industry association level. There are things which we do at a country level or a state level, right? For example, I don't think, a company which is in a Orissa says I have to plan for all this people relocation, right? That has to be done at a state level. So now sometimes you say, okay, state, I can't trust state at all, right? The way all of us put, backup power, right? Which is saying I can't trust it. We put, so all I'm saying is, I know I'm probably not answering the question, but I'm saying, I would simply say, don't assume as if we're going to live with pandemic all the time. But at the same time, make sure you solve the problem for a pandemic. That's a problem. That's a solution which is not valid for all the time to come. So there's a solution for this particular few, hopefully, vaccination and all that. And then say, in the process, if there was a byproduct of learning, right, which was not intended, but I learned something, how do I use it? To me, that would be the right way of looking at it.
Right, sir. So the takeaway is that we need to understand that what is to be done at the unit level, what is to be done at the association level and at the country level are way different things. And we cannot generalize everything. The problem has to be looked at in detail and then take the lessons. And as you rightly said, we can't be prepared for what has happened once in 100 years kind of situation. That's you have answered that question, sir. No problem. So the next point I have is, how does digitalization of supply chain help heavy equipment transportation? How can digital help in last mile delivery?
Again, I would hesitate to say what's the problem you're solving. I would say in heavy equipment, I think there's a huge opportunity. The way we talked about I mean, to some extent, a lot of those industrial spares example, that's where we are going to see a lot more opportunities, right? Then simply saying that, how do I transport this equipment in a better way, right? I don't see again, as I said, one can get into specifics in terms of what's the problem you're trying to solve. But I see a lot more opportunities there, right? Because now you'll have a lot more data about what's happening in the equipment, which you bring it back in your own design and operations kind of thing. You're offering a whole lot of different kind of services, which customers going to value, which you couldn't offer earlier, right? So I think heavy equipment manufacturers is a huge thing, but not necessarily in the areas which the question is asking.
Right, sir. I get the point. Sir, I'm skipping a few questions and plugging in one which has emerged. This reimagining which you have mentioned, in the context of education sector, how it has happened and what has IIM Udaipur done differently?
So, I talked about legacy, right? I'm a same prisoner of legacy, right? I mean, so I'll tell you the way we are looking at it, but I know I'm looking at with a tinted glass. Okay. So I'll tell you what we are thinking, but I'm aware that why I'm thinking that way. Okay. So what's a legacy I have? We have a campus, which is a 450 crore campus. We have a 200 acre of land, beautiful campus, 780 rooms, right? 50 faculty houses. They're all built there, right? Now, whatever I do, that clouds my thinking, right? So ideally, my board essentially should give this task to somebody else, because whatever I do, the reason I'm saying is, if somebody had posed this problem to me in 2011, where we had just started, we didn't have a campus, the way we would have looked at would be very different, right? So I'm saying legacy businesses, right? So for example, in 2011, we did reimagination, okay? Because we were new at that point in time. So we talked about several ideas, for example, research, what we've done is something we're very proud of, right? We've created a very different ecosystem in research. The way we talk about student transformation, all that. But today, my ability to look at issues is very clouded. So that's where the reimagination issue, whatever you do, I can't wish that away. So with the result, I'll tell you what we are thinking. But I'm fully aware it's colored by, legacy. So what we have decided that for IIM Udaipur, for us, 2-year MBA is a, 2-year MBA and 1-year MBA are the flagship program. So we've decided face-to-face campus will remain dominant form for us. Okay, but we're going to use technology in several ways to augment the quality of experience, right? For example, earlier I would have never thought about getting somebody, a industry person from Europe in my classroom. Today I can still get him for 15 minutes, right? So similarly, there are times where student is not in my campus. I can still be in touch with him during summer internship or even before the person joins. Now, similarly, I can look at the student in terms of saying, today I do by and large pitching at an average level. There are people who are ahead of me. There are people who can't understand basics. Now, I can now think of ways in which I can do something for each one of the group, right? So I think it's possible. So we are saying the face-to-face campus-based experience will remain core to us. But we're going to augment that experience based on what we've learned. We would look at executive education differently, where we would look at a hybrid model. Is this an honest exercise? I don't know. I'm aware of the lenses, right? So maybe I'm doing what when electrical engine came in, right? Electric motor, I'm doing something similar. right? Similarly, the way flexible manufacturing system I talked about, Jaikumar, I'm saying, so to me, what we're doing is a classic example of problem of reimagination, right? And I'm saying ideal would have been if my board gives this task to somebody else, right? Saying, I want you to relook at it. Forget the fact that we have this 450 crore campus, forget the fact that we have so many rooms, forget the fact that we have this, because that's done, right? But to me, without realizing, that clouds my thinking, right? Even though I'm aware, I'm still not able to reimagine beyond that point. I'm still just talking about saying, no, this will remain central to us. We will. So I hope, I've given you an honest answer.
That's really, really honest. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
So, but I definitely see very interesting opportunity. So again, I'm saying the answers, this is the way we have see answers for a tier 1 school could be different from tier 2 school to that. I'm saying today, if I was a tier 2 school, I would do it very differently. I would use MOOCs in a more effective way. I would look at my faculty. I mean, forget AICT, all that, okay? They may not approve all this. But I'm saying I would look at my faculty as those who are more process, are not content expert, right? But those who can actually say the content is given by this MOOCs, and I will use my faculty to focus much more on discussions, process part of it kind of thing. So there is a very interesting possibilities which are going to happen. It can create a level playing field, right? Sure. Okay.
Great, sir. Great. Now I'm going to switch this question to Professor R. Prasad. He will have to excuse me for jumping the clusters. The question is, you have been part of ICFAI group for a long time, and the group itself is 3.5 decades old, a little more than that. And the B School program, the MBA program itself is 25 years old. What kind of legacies did you inherit that were limiting to you while architecting the online MBA program? Can you share some of the lessons in the context of what Professor Janat Shah has mentioned?
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar. It's a wonderful question. I think, I'll connect first to what Sir has said. I didn't have the legacy because I was not answerable for the campus program. So it's a question of zero upstart, like zero budgeting. So the question was, the question in front of us was, how do you imagine education for the future? And the issues were that, people were not paying attention. You have average students, everybody is not self-driven. They're not going to read all that you ask them to do. You may be a sage on the stage, but, now you require a guide by the side. So all these were questions which came up. And as far the regulator goes for fully online programs, you're allowed only 1 hour a week for what you call the live session. Okay, so he has plugged it. So he has ensured that you don't teach too much. So therefore, the question to us was, how do you utilize the remaining 9 hours that he's supposed to learn? People may not learn 9 hours, but whatever other time that they learn, how are you going to engage them? So here the flexibility, here one of the questions which came up was, do people understand the difference between flipped classroom and flipped learning? This is one of the questions from one of the professors who joined the group. And it's a very interesting question. And while the flipped classroom looks more, what campuses will do, flipped learning is something that fully online programs need to do. And here the kind of flexibility that you provide in the environment, the learning culture that you put, I mean, the guide by the side kind of thing, a lot of people who know a lot of things, and through peer learning also you can understand. MOOCs are already doing it in a certain way. The third dimension being the content. How do you approach the content very differently now that that's going to be a very powerful factor, and you have only 1 hour. So how we are drawn by advertisements on television and we understand a lot of things. Though correct or not, this pandemic has increased the general knowledge of people on medical areas. Okay, they may not be right, but they understand far more terminology today, listening into all those nuggets of information which are coming. So there is a certain process like that, which I I know in terms of how we have been thinking, which will work out here also. And what happens is that you become through all those pieces which you accumulate over a period of time, you gather a certain level of understanding of subject, which is organized in a completely different way than you do when you do it in a campus. So this is the approach that we are building on. We are in very early stages because we've just started our first batch, but the philosophy is that, and we are looking at each batch and meeting every week to see, how they are responding, what is working, what is not working, what is that we can try, and hopefully, I think we should be able to learn from that. I think that would be my response, Professor Sudhakar.
Great. Thank you very much. Challenging times for all of us in our own domains, and we keep picking up how to be customer centric and use the necessary experience, technology, so on and so forth. Professor Prasad, if you have any question to wrap up, you can ask Professor Janat Shah, and after that, we can probably close the session with his permission.
Yes, sir. Actually, I'll condense the last section, which is largely related to education, into one question. The questions are largely related to about employment, how employment will change because of these changes. The second is about skills. What kind of skills should people have, particularly MBA graduates? And the third is about what institutions need to do. So this is the question, sir.
Yeah, so I think two things. One is technology will remain central. So somewhere in our courses, we need to, actually make sure they understand that how to use technology, right? So for example, when we looked at, I teach operations supply chain, and when I looked at my course, honestly, there was hardly any digital. Okay. So we said, so I think somewhere, how do we bring digital into our curriculum is a big challenge. Okay. I'll tell you what we did. We decided to start a separate program, pilot program, which we call 1-year MBA in Digital Enterprise Management. And we are learning there and transferring the learning in other programs. Okay. Because, you can't do experimentation in a large program. So we're doing a lot of experimentation there. We have an advisory body which is guiding us. So one is, I think, technology in our curriculum. How do we bring it? We don't have easy answer, but that's one. Second, I think none of us can actually say what kind of jobs will be there 5 years from now. It's a futile to answer that question, right? So I think that idea that two things. One, what are the skills which people would need in a technology-driven environment? And second, saying that what are the skills you think, so for example, we think certain skills where they'll be able to work along with the machines, work with the teams. So I think certain things will never go away, which is, for example, problem solving, communication skills, because finally you will still have to convince a group of people, working in a team, right? Design thinking, right? Critical thinking. So in my view, some of the skills we will still have to give, with the idea that whatever those new kinds of job come in, right? Somewhere I should be able to learn myself. Similarly, for example, so I'll tell you the way we have looked at this technology issue. We're saying you should be able to take one technology and take up a project where you should be able to dirty your hands and solve a problem. It's unlikely you're going to solve that you're going to face that technology again. But what we want you to learn is, the question I was asking you, what are the questions you should ask, right? So if I can say that I've learned how to ask meaningful questions whenever I see a technology, and finally translate it into that problem solving, then hopefully I'll be able to transfer that learning to another technology also. So I think at a core level, the skills will remain important. I think this idea that bulk of the thing which we, for example, finance, right? How do you value a derivative is not going to be, machine is only going to do it, right? So a lot of those things which were considered high price skills is a financial analyst that's going to go away, right? So how do you design your curriculum where you give this core skills which are not necessarily as important in a first job, right? So it remains a huge challenge, honestly, to convince people that this may not be very important for your first job, but will be more important, right? So I think some of this we'll have to figure out a way of weaving in our curriculum and keep doing those dialogues with students, bring alumni somewhere. I don't know. I mean, so how do you first convince your own faculty? Because, faculty becomes a big challenge, right? Because I'm more a subject matter expert. I'll rather teach how to, value derivative, right? Because that's what is my specialization. Now you tell me, make sure I teach problem solving skill, I teach team building skill and all that, So I think first ourselves recognizing that what will stay and what will not, what is unlikely to stay. Because finally you still have to prepare for the immediate job also. So how do you build that portfolio in these things and bring technology somehow? I don't have an easy answer, but you have to bring technology, right? So for example, suppose you had asked these questions to me about 25 years back. I still remember those discussions where people were saying, do I need to learn spreadsheet? I'm a manager. I do strategy thinking. I don't need to learn spreadsheet. Today, no manager can say this. I see same thing with big data, right? I don't think manager can say, I don't want to look at it. Does not mean I need to know Python, right? So I think, how do we figure this out? That what's a right balance about technology I need to know? What's a right balance I need to know about analytics? I'm not competing with ISI, right? There's no way I'm going to compete with ISI, Indian Statistical Institution, neither with IIT. But what's a right level of understanding I have when I look at technology, when I look at analytics? Can I lead a team which would have a technology guy there? Can I lead a team which would have an analytics guy? Can I pose a question to him? To me, those issues will remain important. And how do I bring those into curriculum?
Thank you, sir. I think you framed it very well. As a manager, as a management student, I should be able to ask questions which are relevant from a customer point of view, from a management point of view, from an organization point of view. And to that extent, I need to understand what all these new technologies are, and then I should be able to bridge, and so that the organization is able to come out with a solution or something which can be defined, gets approval, and then you move on. I think, sir, that framework is very good, and there's a lot to learn in that. It's since it's a framework, we'll have to adapt it to each of our contexts and see how it works. Thanks a lot, sir. It's been a wonderful discussion. And there are a lot of things that, I think the entire group of participants would have understood on the very basics and the very framework kind of approach to this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Sudhakar.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Some of very difficult questions, but I enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of ICFAI Group, I want to very profusely thank you for agreeing to speak in our webinar and share these wonderful insights.
Never say no to a student, right? So,
yes,
it was simple. When he said the request, I said, yeah.
More than anything else, today I felt like going back to school with your amazing perspectives and connecting operations to strategy in a very, very unique way that you have always been doing, that I witnessed over the last 25 years.
But I also give a lot of credit to Professor Sai Prasad, because he has influenced a lot of the thinking, especially the initial part. Yeah.
Great, sir. And I also would like to thank all the members of audience who have participated so patiently and raised so many interesting questions for us to make the whole discussion very, very useful. And there are a huge number of takeaways for all of us. We will make the recording of this session also available in a couple of days from now. While thanking all the members who participated and also thanking our esteemed guests, I would like to mention that we will again come back with a webinar on Friday next. And this time it is going to be Mr. Vivek Kaul, who is the author of Bad Money. The topic is going to be the big bad world of bad money. It's going to be interesting again. next Friday on June 25th at the same time, 6:30 p.m. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. Do take care and stay safe. The pandemic is not over yet, and many questions remain unanswered. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, once again. With your permission, we close.
Thank you, everyone. I was wonderful. So thank you again, Sudhakar, and thank you, Professor Prasad, and thank you, everyone. Bye.
Right.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.